Imagine a stone chamber buried in a mountain. Inside it sits a monk. The chamber is barely large enough for him to sit upright. His legs cannot stretch. His back touches cold stone. In his hand is a small bell. Outside the chamber, other monks are listening. Every day, the bell rings. One ring means only one thing. He is still alive. Day after day, the sound continues. A weak metal chime from inside the sealed chamber. Then one day, the bell stops. Silence. The monks outside do something that feels impossible. They do not open the chamber. They do not check the body. They do not perform a burial. Instead, they leave the chamber sealed. Not for a few days, not for a few months, for 3 years. 3 years later, the chamber is opened. And sometimes what they find inside should not be possible. The monk is still sitting upright, hands resting calmly, eyes closed, skin still stretched over bone. The body has not rotted. No chemicals were used, no embalming, no preservation. Just a human body that somehow refused to decay. These monks were attempting one of the most extreme rituals in human history. They were trying to turn themselves into mummies while they were still alive. The practice is called Sokushinbutsu, and the way they did it was even more disturbing than the result, the belief behind it. Why would anyone do this? The answer begins more than 1,000 years ago in Japan. A Buddhist monk named Kūkai introduced a form of Buddhism called Shingon, and inside this belief was a dangerous idea. Most religions say enlightenment happens after death. Shingon said something very different. A person could become a Buddha while still alive, not in another life, not in some distant future, in this body. But there was a problem. Anyone can claim enlightenment, so the monks believed there had to be a test that could not be faked, a test that could not be explained away, and that test would come after death. If a monk had truly reached enlightenment, his body would not decay. But if he was wrong, if his mind had failed, his body would rot like any other corpse. No excuses, no reinterpretation. The body itself would decide the truth. Stage 1, the 1,000-day starvation. The transformation did not start in the chamber. It started years earlier. The first stage lasted about 1,000 days, almost 3 years. During this time, the monk abandoned normal food completely. No rice, no vegetables, no grains. The foods that kept ordinary people alive were now forbidden. Instead, the monk survived only on what he could gather from the mountains around him. Tree bark, roots pulled from the ground, pine needles, occasionally a few nuts, nothing more. Every day he climbed the mountains to find these things. Every day his body grew weaker. Slowly the fat disappeared, then the muscle. His ribs became visible, his face hollowed, his body began to shrink. This starvation was not an accident. It had a very specific purpose. After death, the first thing bacteria attack is body fat, so the monks removed it completely. By the end of the stage, their bodies were already beginning to look less like living humans, and more like the mummies they hoped to become. But the process was far from over. The next stage would be even worse. Stage 2, poisoning the body. But starvation was not enough. Even a starved body will still decay after death. So the monks did something even more extreme. They began drinking a liquid called urushi tea. It was made from the sap of the Japanese lacquer tree, the same sap used to make traditional lacquerware. But inside the human body, it is toxic. The liquid burns the stomach. It triggers violent vomiting. It drains the body of water, and the monks drank it every day. This was not meant to make them stronger. It was meant to poison their own bodies. The toxins slowly killed parasites and bacteria living inside them. It also soaked into their tissues. If insects later tried to feed on the body, they would be poisoned too. By this point, the monk's body had become something unnatural, starved, dehydrated, and slowly turning toxic. All of it for one purpose: to make sure that after death, nothing in nature would want to consume him. Stage 3, the living burial. After years of starvation and poison, the monk's body had been stripped down as much as possible. Almost no fat, almost no muscle. Very little water left inside the body. Only then did the final stage begin. A small stone chamber was prepared underground. It was barely large enough for a man to sit inside. Not to stand, not to lie down, only to sit. Inside the chamber there were only two things: a thin tube that carried air from the outside, and a small bell placed in the monk's hand. The monk entered the chamber alive. Then the entrance was sealed shut with stone. From that moment on, he was completely alone. Every day the monk rang the bell. One quiet sound from inside the earth. The sound meant only one thing: he was still alive. Outside, the other monks waited and listened. Day after day, the bell continued to ring, until one day, the bell stopped. The silence meant the monk inside had died. When that happened, the monks outside did something final. They removed the air tube, and the chamber was sealed completely. From that moment forward, no one would open it. Not for months, not for years. The monk would remain inside the chamber for 3 years and 3 months, and only then would anyone return to see what had happened to the body inside. The waiting period. The chamber stayed sealed for 3 years and 3 months. No one opened it. No one checked inside. Time was the only thing allowed to decide the outcome. After those years passed, the monks finally returned. The stone seal was broken. The chamber was opened. And for the first time since the bell stopped, they looked inside. What they found determined everything. If the body had collapsed, if the flesh had rotted, then the attempt had failed. The monk was buried quietly like anyone else. But sometimes the result was different. The monk was still sitting upright, skin still clinging to bone, the body dry, preserved. If that happened, the monk was given a new title, Sokushinbutsu, a monk believed to have become a living Buddha. How rare it was. Over the centuries, many monks tried to complete this ritual. No one knows the exact number, but historians believe hundreds of monks attempted the process. Almost all of them failed. When their chambers were opened, the bodies had decayed like any normal corpse, which meant the ritual had not worked. Only a very small number were different. Today, historians believe that around 20 monks truly completed the process. Their bodies did not rot. They remained preserved exactly where they died. One of the most well-known examples is Shinyokai Shonin. His body still sits upright inside Dainichibo Temple in northern Japan. Visitors can see him today, a monk who began the process while alive and never left the chamber. Why the practice was banned? By the late 1800s, Japan was changing rapidly. The country was modernizing, new laws were being introduced, and practices that once belonged to old religious traditions began to face scrutiny. In 1877, the Japanese government officially banned Sokushinbutsu. Authorities considered the ritual a form of suicide. From the government's perspective, allowing monks to slowly starve and poison themselves could no longer be justified. The chambers were no longer allowed to be built. The ritual could no longer be performed. But by the time the ban was enforced, something unusual had already been left behind. Inside several temples across northern Japan, there were still real human bodies. Monks who had completed the ritual decades, sometimes centuries earlier, still sitting upright, still preserved. Silent witnesses to one of the most extreme religious practices in human history. Final proof. Sokushinbutsu was never meant to be symbolic. It was meant to prove something. The monks believed enlightenment should leave physical evidence, not words, not philosophy. The body itself would reveal the truth. If the monk had truly reached enlightenment, his body would remain preserved after death. But if he was wrong, if his belief had failed, his body would decay like any other corpse. There was no excuse, no way to reinterpret the result. For the monks who attempted Sokushinbutsu, belief alone was not enough. Their own bodies had to become the final proof.